Hello and welcome to our briefing to the regional group of Asia Pacific on best practices for gender equality in conventional arms control. I'm Renata Dall'Acqua and I work at UNIDIR, the UN Institute for Disarmament Research, where I lead the Gender and Disarmament Program. We are at the moment producing this, organizing these regional briefings with the objective of taking stock of what has been achieved so far in terms of gender mainstreaming in certain conventional arms control and disarmament fora, and also discussing what's next, what are new areas for action, especially with a view to informing the upcoming disarmament meetings. For instance, the meeting of states parties of the APMBC, which is happening in November, the Anti-Personal Landmine Ban Convention, and also the meeting of the CCW, which discusses IEDs, AP2, also happening in November. And we will also discuss weapons and ammunition management as we have the OEWG on ammunition happening in January. If we can go to the agenda of the meeting, let me just say that we will hear for opening remarks from Ambassador Maria Teresa Almoyuela of the Philippines. We'll then have a presentation by the UNIDIR team, which will be done by me, by my colleague Hannah Salama, and my colleague Erica Mumford. Then we'll have time for Q&A, where we encourage participants to share questions, make comments, add suggestions using the chat function, but also taking the floor. And then we'll have closing remarks by Cecilia Aptel, the Deputy Director of UNIDIR. In terms of a bit of a housekeeping rules, I would like to inform that this meeting is being recorded with a view to being uploaded to the UNIDIR YouTube channel so it can be disseminated among more actors interested in this topic. If you can keep your cameras on, that helps with the interactive element of the meeting. But if you're not speaking, I'll also ask you to mute yourself. And I think this is kind of, the basics. We all know a lot about how to use WebEx and Zoom these days. So I would like to introduce our opening speaker, Ambassador Maria Teresa Almoyuela of the Philippines. Ambassador Almoyuela represents the Philippines in Geneva. She is an international gender champion and a co-chair of the Disarmament Impact Group. She's very active. We all appreciate her leadership when it comes to bringing gender considerations into all areas of arms control and disarmament. Ambassador Moyuela has an extensive career in the Foreign Service, and she was also posted in Beijing and Vienna as well. Ambassador, we're looking forward to hearing your thoughts on gender mainstreaming in arms control and disarmament. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Renata, and good morning and good afternoon to our colleagues participating from Geneva, from New York, and of course from my region, the Asia Pacific region. My name is Maria Teresa Almoyuela, and as mentioned by Renata, I'm a part of the Disarmament Impact Group. Together with representatives of UNIDIR, of course, is a co-chair. We're there with Australia, with Namibia and Ireland. And we are happy and always very pleased that UNIDIR has provided us sustained processes to continue to discuss gender mainstreaming in conventional arms control. UNIDIR, of course, as you're aware, has produced an important body of work over the years on gender and disarmament. And we are privileged today to listen to their experts about their insights on the gender agenda, in particular, and how it is moving across the conventional arms control fora. I am confident that we will all be enriched by this interaction and we will have more concrete ideas on how to pursue actions towards deepening this advocacy, but also implementing more inclusively all these instruments that are important in our work. Let me emphasize that there have been significant accomplishments across the board on mainstreaming gender considerations in global, regional, and national discussions in conventional arms control, including in the Asia Pacific region. We need to build on them and consider further work to be critically important to sustaining these gains, and especially in the communities that continue to face threats and risk from such weapons and ammunition. The Philippine experience, for example, in peacemaking and currently in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, emphasized that peace and security are intrinsic to the development agenda and that the whole, inclusive, and empowering effective approach is one that empowers and includes men and women, the young and the old, and communities, and allow them to be agents of change and transformation. The global processes, of course, and we are talking about the meetings and processes that we have in Geneva, New York, and elsewhere. We are all trying to ensure that these important realities guide and inform directions of our work and visions for the implementation of these treaties. And that importantly, that our discussions in New York and in Geneva contribute to strengthening the global, regional, and national frameworks for women to participate more meaningfully in the processes on the ground, but also to mainstream gender considerations in various aspects of the work on conventional arms control. Allow me to cite, for example, the 8th Biennial Meeting of States on the Plan of Action to Prevent, Combat, Eradicate the illicit trade in small arms and light weapons in all its aspects. It's a very long name, but let's call it BMS 8 for short, which took place from June 27 to July 1, 2022 in New York. So by rotation, it was the turn of the Asia Pacific region to chair the BMS process, and the Philippines had the privilege of chairing this meeting in the person of then permanent representative and ambassador, but now the foreign minister of the Philippines, Enrique Manalo. So BMS 8 focused on enhancing modalities and procedures for international cooperation and assistance. And it successfully provided a new ballast to the implementation of this POA on small arms and light weapons by underlining that assistance must respond to needs and priorities at the national and regional levels, and that synergies must be enhanced amongst and between sub-regional, regional, and cross-regional cooperation processes, including on information sharing and national control measures. Importantly, and most relevant for this discussion this morning, is that the BMS 8 sustained the progress achieved earlier on the integration of the gender agenda in the POA on small arms and light weapons. It recognized the full, equal, and meaningful participation of women in the work on this plan of action. And specific references were made in the outcome document on the following. One, the gendered impact of illicit trade in small arms and light weapons on individuals, men, women, young people, old people, including gender-based violence, and accordingly, the need for differentiated response mechanisms to these impacts. Number two, a call for coordination between this plan of action and women and peace and security focal points, and the sharing of good practices and experiences between them at the national, regional, and global levels. So, in the context of the work of the BMS 8 and the vision it outlined for the way forward on this plan of action, as well as in the international tracing instrument, the Philippines considers this regional briefing to be very timely, a very timely and useful follow up. Of course, our colleagues from UNIDIR will be uh, covering the range of conventional weapons and the fora, including mine action, including improvised explosive devices, and we will listen to them very, very intently. Um, I truly hope that this presentation of the UNIDIR unpacks the full spectrum of the current best practices across the different fora, and in doing so, inspire each of us to learn from how gender mainstreaming is being done in each fora, and to help us, on our individual and national um, uh, personalities and capacities to contribute more actively to these processes, but also to pursue actions at all levels of engagement. So, thank you for this opportunity to be part of this very, very important exchange. I'm happy to be part of the Asia Pacific region. It's a great hub. There's so many things happening in our region, and I wish us all a most productive time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for these opening remarks. As I said before, we really appreciate Philippines' leadership in this issue, and thank you very much for recalling the outcomes of BMS 8. I think they will come up in the presentation. But I think it's time for us now to get started to the main topic of today's briefing, which is gender mainstreaming in arms control and disarmament. And we have some kind of background information, background slides that we would like to share before we move into the specifics of mine action and WAM. And the first one, as we have here, is a question that we hear a lot from diplomats and practitioners that are interested in gender perspectives, but they ask us the how question, how can we integrate gender perspectives into arms control, non-proliferation, and disarmament? I think there may be many ways to do so. What we have observed in the past few years are three main avenues. It doesn't mean they are an exhaustive list, but it's just what we have seen as most common so far in the field of arms control and disarmament. The first avenue relates to promoting gender equality and improving women's meaningful participation and agency in arms control, non-proliferation, and disarmament. So this refers to specific programs aimed at addressing the gender imbalances in the field and empowering women as diplomats, as technical arms controllers, as leaders in the community to address issues related to weapons governance. The second avenue is applying a gender analysis, a gender lens, that is to consider how gender norms shape how weapons are seen and used in society, as well as the impacts of weapons and violence. So in this regard, we can think about the ATT, for instance, the Arms Trade Treaty, which requires states parties to consider and to perform a risk assessment to analyze whether those weapons being or material being exported are at risk of being used to commit or facilitate gender-based violence. And the third area refers to connecting policy agendas to that is to say, to enhance policy coordination and between different agendas. For instance, looking at arms control and disarmament and its interlinkages with the SDGs, with the Sustainable Development Goals, or looking at disarmament and its relevance to the Women, Peace and Security agenda. And this was something that came up in the BMS 8. The outcome document also mentioned the need for harmonized policies on small arms and light weapons on one hand and women, peace and security on the other. So this is something we are also seeing at the national level with national action plans on women, peace and security already starting to address issues of weapons. So this is just an overview of how the integration between gender perspectives and arms control and disarmament has been taking place over the past couple of years. And if we can get to the next slide, it addresses the question of why. Why do we do this work? Why does it matter? This is also a question. For some people, it may be obvious, but I think for us, it's important also to address this because a lot of people come and ask us this, why should we care? Well, I think the first point is we do this work because we would like to ensure equal rights. Men and women have the same rights when it comes to participating in decision making, in deliberations, in the implementations of policies and programs that will affect their lives. Beyond that, in addition to that, a gender lens also helps us to understand the different needs and also to improve response strategies. In this sense, it helps us to increase resilience and to aid recovery following weapons use. A gender lens is also helpful to uncover some associations between gender and power. Uh, it can help us to reduce gender inequalities or at least avoid exacerbating them. It can improve policy coordination. In this way, it can also be a means to maximize the use of resources, increase efficiency, and ensure that policies deliver for all. And in this particular field where women are underrepresented, a gender lens can help us to unlock professional opportunities for women and have a positive impact in their lives and in their communities. And we'll hear more about that, but I think there are also already some studies about women working in the field of demining and how that has also led to economic and political empowerment. If we can go to the next slide. We'll start our presentation today focusing on the field of mine action. And this is because it's a good starting point for us. It's already a field where gender mainstreaming is fairly advanced. And it's also a timely issue because we will have the 20th meeting of the APMBC taking place in Geneva later this month in November. So if we can see the next slide, the APMBC already has a very solid framework for integrating gender perspectives, which is the Oslo Action Plan. The Oslo Action Plan requires states parties to mainstream gender considerations in mine action programming, including mine risk education and victim assistance. So when states parties are reporting on these programs, they must present data disaggregated by gender and by age. And this is important because it can lead to a better understanding of who is being part of the mine action programs and what are the barriers that are preventing survivors or persons with disabilities or indirect victims from accessing those services as well. The fourth review conference of the APMBC, the one that adopted the Oslo Action Plan in 2019, also amended the working methods of the convention committees. And they adopted an innovative approach. They said that each of the 5 committees will appoint a focal point to provide advice on gender mainstreaming. So that is how the APMBC decided to assign the role of gender focal points to states parties coordinating work under the different committees. And this started in late 2019, so in fact 2020, and we have seen this approach of appointing gender focal points take place in other fora as well, in the Convention on Cluster Munition, and more recently in the Treaty of the of the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the TPNW. So this is a new development in the field of arms control and disarmament, and it may be a bit soon to assess their full impact, but it's already something that we would like to start discussing. How is the work of gender focal points functioning in the different conventions? And what are the best practices and also what are the challenges? So again, when we have the Q&A, this is something we'd like to hear from you, how you see the work of the gender focal points in the different conventions. If we can go to the next slide, I would like to also address the synergies between mine action on one hand, IED related work, and also the Women, Peace and Security agenda. And this is a discussion that we were fortunate to have already in Geneva in July this year in the context of the CCW meeting of experts for AP2, for amended Protocol 2. UNIDIR was invited by the coordinators, which were France and Colombia, to present on the synergies between IED-related work and the Women, Peace and Security agenda. And given that the CCW is meeting again in November, we thought it would be useful to have this recap of how the pillars of the Women, Peace and Security agenda, that is participation, prevention, protection, and relief and recovery, are relevant to work on mine action and to work related to IED. So the first point, I think it's a fairly obvious one, the participation of women in policy making and their employment in different roles in mine action and IED is transformative and contribute to their economic and political empowerment. The ban on the use of landmines and the destruction of their stockpiles contributes to the prevention and protection from armed violence, which are goals of the WPS agenda. Gender and diversity sensitive education to the risks of landmines, to the risks of IED, contributes to preventing injuries and saving lives. Victim assistance and advocacy for the rights of survivors help to combat sexual and gender based violence, which tend to have a high prevalence in conflict and post conflict situations. Clearance and handover of land previously contaminated by landmines or contaminated by IEDs can redress gender imbalance and empower women in the community if it's done in a way that also increase or promote equal rights regarding land ownership, for instance. So these are just some of the ideas that we shared with member states in July and that we would like all of you to keep in mind when coming to CCW and APMBC meetings this month. If we can move to the next slide, we'll also be presenting some areas for action, some ideas for member states and stakeholders participating in APMBC and CCW AP2. The first one is to ensure the full and meaningful participation of women, as well as the inclusion of more diverse voices in multilateral meetings, such as survivors and their representative organizations. On this point, we can also highlight a good practice from the APMBC, which is to have youth representatives participating in the meetings. I think there is the Youth Fellows in Mine Action, which is a very interesting group. They come to Geneva. They have meetings with different organizations in Geneva. They follow the discussions and they also deliver statements. We were fortunate to have an event with one of the youth representatives from Lebanon earlier this year, and we could see firsthand how this type of activity can also empower the next generation. Another area for action is to support mechanisms for disaggregated data collection related to the patterns of landmines and the patterns of IED casualties as well. So we can better understand issues related to risk and also the needs of survivors. A third area for action is to include mine action and IED threats in WPS and national action plans. And a fourth area for action is to support the work of the gender focal points. It may be that more can be done to provide, let's say, political support, but also support with resources, with research, with ideas, to make sure that the gender focal points can fully realize their mandate. So with this, I close the area, the first segment of our presentation, which was focused on mine action. And I would now like to give the floor to my colleague, Hannah, who will talk about weapons and ammunition management.
Thank you, Renata, and really like to thank the ambassador today for her kind comments about UNIDIR's work. And I welcome you all this morning to this briefing. So I will speak about gender and WAM, which is Weapons and Ammunition Management, and more specifically on the data we have collected on women's participation in this area of work. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So as the ambassador has mentioned, and Renata, UNIDIR has been doing research on women's participation in both diplomacy for arms control and disarmament, as well as technical implementation roles in this field. In 2019, we did a report which showed that women in diplomacy and in arms control and disarmament for us were still underrepresented. They only constituted 30% of delegations across disarmament fora. So this was not limited to conventional arms only. And then when it came to the heads of delegations, head of disarmament and arms control delegations, women only constituted 20%. I think now the numbers have slightly increased, and we are seeing kind of more focus on this area to ensure that delegations are gender balanced and that women have a more prominent role and a more meaningful role in terms of disarmament diplomacy. In 2020, we looked at implementation roles and technical roles in weapons and ammunition management. And here we looked at roles such as ammunition technical officers, explosive ordnance disposal specialists, women and men who worked in physical security and stockpile management, so an area known as PSSM, marking, tracing, etc. In those roles, we found that, first of all, data was not widely available about who was doing those roles and where they were from, and it wasn't disaggregated by gender. But we did review trainings, so technical trainings in the field of ATO, EOD, and PSSM. So a review of these trainings showed that women constituted less than 12% of technical training participants. So this was very low. We also interviewed around 40 professionals in this field, and these interviews revealed that women still face significant institutional barriers when accessing these roles, as well as sometimes stereotyping and outright discrimination. This is mainly because these roles have a long history of coming from military or national security institutions. And as we know, national security institutions still have very low women's participation. And in some countries, the practices and policies are still not adapted to a more diverse workforce. If we move on to the next slide, I'd like to expand on what Renata has said about why does gender matter in these technical roles? If somebody can do the job and they have the skills, why does their gender matter? And that's a very good question that many people have asked. Of course, there is the rights-based approach. Women should be accessing all types of jobs in all types of job field based on their right to choose and to participate in decisions that affect their lives and in the implementation of arms control and disarmament processes, but also the idea and the research that has come out about diverse and gender balanced workforce. This has mainly come out of the mine action community, and it showed that disposal specialists and mine clearing teams, which were gender diverse, so were not only single sex, but had women and men, were more effective and were in fact safer, and there was less accidents being caused. So we can easily transfer this finding to other fields in WAM. And in fact, when talking to the professionals, they really pointed that the lack of diversity was a problem and that they felt that a more gender balanced or diverse team would help ensure that the needs of men, women, girls, and boys were considered in all aspects of weapons and ammunition management. And of course, again, from research in the mine action field, we know that improving women's access to the job market and to security sector jobs has a potential to transform power and gender relations, not only for the individual by empowering them, giving them a job, etc., so they can take care of their family, but also transforming the perception of women from victims of conflict into members of the community that are actively working in the post-conflict reconstruction. And this is really critical at a time where, conflict has probably decimated the country, and there's lots of economic problems. So opening up more job opportunities for women will make a difference for the community as a whole. Next slide, please. So now that we know why, and we'll look at the how. How can we increase women's participation in these technical roles? And as I said, in 2021, we published the report Women Managing Weapons, where we collected data from training, but also interviewed professionals in the field. And we found a couple of things that could be changed, that could be improved to improve women's participation in technical roles. These were addressed to several actors. So there is a role for states, member states, there is a role for international organizations, and there is a role for civil society and specialized NGOs who are often supporting countries in their weapon and ammunition management. So the first thing I think is a point for everybody, for all actors, is to support the women that are already there, that are already doing these roles. And I was very fortunate to be able to interview over a dozen of them who are working in these technical roles. Here we found that professional networks in different fields, that especially in fields that are male dominated, such as weapons and ammunition management, are beneficial for women in their personally, but also for their career progression. And so actually this week, ODA, the Office of Disarmament Affairs, will be hosting the first workshop for women professional ATOs in hopes of starting a network for these professionals. And UNIDIR is very happy to participate and join this workshop and and see how it develops. The next 2 points are really about member states. As I said, many of these roles have their origin in national security institutions, such as the military and law enforcement. And there, because of the history of male dominance, there might be policies, practices, legislations that are hindering women from accessing the military or from, so it's important to review this legislation from a gender lens. And I know that there's a lot of work being done by other institutions to review national security institution policies to make them more gender sensitive and promote gender parity. Another idea is to, for donors and funders and member states to fund WAM trainings and WAM activities and make this conditional on women's participation. So really putting the money where their mouth is. And then also fund initiatives which address the barriers to entry for women in this field. Another interesting finding and opportunity was really addressed at international organizations and INGOs who are doing trainings, technical trainings in weapons and ammunition management that are training civilians in these roles. And so this is a real opportunity to sort of leapfrog what, the security institutions and have both men and women from different backgrounds being trained in these roles. Now, there is more that I can say about how, but I encourage you to consult our blog, eight ways to support women's participation in WAM technical roles, for more ideas. But I also would love to hear from the member states that are here and civil society about different ways and different strategies to attract more women to historically male-dominated fields. I think this exchange could be interesting. And so with this, I wanted to pass it on to my colleague Erica, who will be talking about the specific multilateral process of ammunition management. Thank you. Over to you, Erica.
Thank you, Hannah, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our presentation today. So I will be continuing our presentation with an overview of the conventional ammunition management process. And I will be presenting the group of governmental experts on conventional ammunition stockpiles in surplus and how they have mainstreamed gender into their work. And the GGE was first convened in 2008 to address the threats posed by surplus ammunition stockpiles. And we've seen that compared to other arms control processes mentioned earlier by Renata in her presentation, that the ammunition process has not considered gender as much as other processes. And some experts have suggested that this is because ammunition is particularly technical and has been traditionally male-dominated, also due to more the participation of national security institutions can be traditionally dominated by males. And this has also related to barriers to women's participation within these institutions, as mentioned by Hannah. And building off of the work of the GGE, a second GGE on ammunition was established in 2020 and 2021. And this GGE had a more diverse participation, and the group reached gender parity in its work in 2020 and included a more diverse regional and more regional views from member states. And the gender parity reached in the GGE set an important benchmark for the full and effective participation of women in this area. And it also suggests that there are sufficient numbers of women who have expertise in ammunition management and that gender balance in the delegations can be ensured. And so over time, the GGE has progressively focused on a more holistic approach, also known as the through-life management of ammunition, looking at ammunition from production to disposal. And this holistic approach has also included a more diverse participation from different actors in the process. And we've seen an expansion of delegations to include beyond the ministries of defense to include more types of actors, and this has had positive implications for women's participation in the process. And we've also seen over time a greater incorporation of gender perspectives into the debates. And in 2020, the GGE had a thematic focus of its work on gender mainstreaming of policy and practice. And it has also noted in a General Assembly resolution of the need to encourage the full involvement of both women and men in ammunition management policy and practice. And so in 2021, the GGE concluded with a consensus report. And building off of this, the open-ended working group was established, beginning its work in 2020 with a first substantive session in May, a second substantive session in August, and there will be a third substantive session taking place in February of next year. And so the open-ended working group had an important focus on integrating gender analysis into the debates. And we saw, for example, in the August session that the open-ended working group called to further consider gender perspectives and implications with respect to through-life ammunition management. And we also saw many states calling for the exchange of best practice and the development of guidance on how to integrate gender dimensions into through-life ammunition management. And so on the next slide, we have a few areas for action which we'd like to present that apply to both WAM and the conventional ammunition management process. And starting at the multilateral and regional levels, we've seen an increasing body of evidence to document the gendered impacts of diversion, of the poor management of stockpiles, and also of unplanned explosions in ammunition storage facilities. And it would be important to recognize these impacts and to encourage a greater focus on how these can influence decision making. And we see the varied impacts also go beyond the physical security risks to also having long-term humanitarian, socioeconomic, and public health and environmental consequences, which can all be considered. And we also encourage that gender responsive provisions in both WAM processes and the OEWG on ammunition to be further taken up. And we also would consider that the sharing of national good practice and expertise on gender mainstreaming can have a positive impact on these processes. And we saw in the GGE latest session a great focus on the exchange of good practice in this area. And we'd also promote the strengthening of synergies between international frameworks and regional frameworks on gender and WAM. And for example, by finding complementarities between gendered provisions of arms control and disarmament mechanisms, as well as how WAM can support broader frameworks such as sustainable development and on gender equality. And so we also have a few ideas on the next slide for what can be done at the national level. And we would, so the next slide, please. And we would also promote the greater focus on collecting gender and age disaggregated data and promoting more research on this topic. And we would encourage states to ensure that expertise and information on the expected impacts of ineffective ammunition management and diversion be considered on all stakeholders, including women, men, boys, and girls, and that these are taken into account in planning decisions. And we also call on states to ensure that the full, equal, meaningful, and impactful participation in women in the design, implementation, monitoring, and oversight of WAM at all levels is another area for action. And this can involve ensuring that women and men are equally represented and that staff with gender expertise are actively involved in the different functional roles in through life management. And so all of these areas of action and ideas can support more sustainable decisions and policies in WAM. And we would look forward to hearing also your national experiences and perspectives on these areas for action. And with this, I will thank you for your attention, and I will hand back the floor to Renata. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Erica, and thank you very much, Hannah, for walking us through the latest developments in weapons and ammunition management, and also highlighting the work of the OEWG on ammunition. So this concludes our presentation today. We actually have some questions that we would like to propose for discussion. You are also welcome to propose different questions, and we will try to answer and reflect and see how we can best address them. But if we can go to the next slide, I would just like to highlight a few things that we thought would be interesting to discuss. For instance, what are some good practices on integrating gender perspectives into national policies, programs on arms control and disarmament, as well as what are the opportunities and the challenges for furthering this agenda in your context, in your region, in your country? Gender focal points in multilateral conventions. What is needed to ensure they can fully realize their mandates? On the next slide, we also have some more questions. What is needed to effectively deliver age and gender sensitive assistance to survivors? What are good practices with regards to promoting women's meaningful participation in WAM or in broader security topics in your region? And last but definitely not least, what kind of research and further evidence would be useful in the field of gender and conventional arms control? And this is something that, maybe as at UNIDIR, being a research institute, maybe that's something we can help you with. We actually have a publication that we are drafting on best practices for gender equality in conventional arms control. And it comes from, it will collect data from online survey that we did with national focal points on small arms and light weapons and also on mine action. And maybe some of you have come across our survey because we made the survey open online and we were very insistent writing to different people to see if they could fill the survey out. It was fairly comprehensive survey, and I think in terms of complete responses, we got around 40 something complete responses. And yes, Ambassador Omoyuela, you'd like to comment?
Thank you for letting us know about that survey. I think that will be very informative. But also, just to comment on what was presented by Hannah earlier about uh, what's possible in, for example, the weapons and ammunition management, that we should create professional networks. I think that has been really a case in the life sciences. We see that in the biological weapons convention, even at the early stages at the academic life, we start to connect women professionals, and I think this is something that we observe in the region. Another example that I think illustrates the point and the usefulness of this kind of initiative would be in ASEAN. We have a body called the ASEAN Institute for Peace and Reconciliation, and in 2016, it published a directory, a handbook of women peace negotiators in the region. First of all, to establish the fact that women in ASEAN are leaders in peacemaking. They are there to start with, and that they are ready to be resource persons on these subjects of peacemaking and, in different communities. And I think that's a very good practice, first of all, to establish that there are women in these fields, but also to, as you said, Hannah, uh, to also support their career track if they intend to continue on that pathway, or to move on to other related fields in security and peace. And I think this is something that the region already has. We already have that kind of practice, some good examples, and I think we can expand it to, as you said, these areas like weapons and ammunitions management. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Yeah, I was gonna say, Hannah, do you want to comment?
Sorry, too quick here. But no, I just wanted to thank the ambassador for those really pertinent examples. And I think the recommendation of also starting at the academic stage is something that, it didn't come up in the report and we didn't consider it, but it's something that could be explored in terms of a lot of these women and men come from engineering backgrounds, and how do they make their way to technical or explosive ordnance disposal. It would be interesting to have a closer look and see if connections can be made. And I just think it's a lot of these women, especially in these male-dominated military roles, don't know about each other. So they feel like they're the only ones. And this is what's been very wonderful about this ODA network that has just been started, is that even two women ATOs from the same country connected, but they didn't know each other before, and just making those connections is really helpful down the line as well. So over to you, Renata.
Thank you very much, Ambassador and Hannah, for highlighting this area of action in terms of connecting networks and engaging with academia. This was something that came up in another regional briefing that we did, was to look a bit beyond the traditional security sector institutions, and also connect, with actors from the health community that are involved in providing assistance to survivors, and mainstreaming, help them mainstream gender analysis in their health protocols, for instance. This idea of connecting with academia as well. I think this all help us to make disarmament actually more relevant to other areas, of other policy areas as well. I don't know if anyone would like to make an additional comment. We are coming to the end of the time that we had allocated, but if anyone has a quick intervention, you're most welcome to take the floor. If not, I would like to give the floor to our Deputy Director, Cécile Aptel, for her closing remarks. Cécile, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Renata. Thank you. And let me start by thanking again Ambassador Alburuela for joining us today and delivering not only what were really insightful remarks, but also for being such an active participant in this seminar. And so we really are grateful. Thank you so much, Ambassador. And also for highlighting the good practices, as you were just saying now, and how there is an articulation between what we can do in disarmament and in other related areas, such as, in fact, peace negotiations and peacemaking. So thank you. Really, as we've heard already today, those gendered approaches are already changing the way, not only the way we implement conventional arms control, but the way also agreements are being negotiated and the way we think about disarmament and arms control. There is today a growing awareness about the relationship between gender and access to training, access to decision-making in disarmament. We also have a better understanding of how gender roles shape engagement with weapons and the relevance of this understanding in assistance programs delivered to survivors, for instance. At the multilateral level, we increasingly see a people-centered and also a gendered approach increasingly reflected in the working papers, in resolutions and outcome documents of the various processes in terms of arms control and disarmament. For example, in 2021, as we know well, all of the outcome documents that were adopted in the main conventional arms processes included issues related to gender, and that was the anti-personnel mine ban convention, the arms trade treaty, the convention on cluster ammunition, the program of action on small arms and light weapons, and alongside the calls for harmonization of national policies on weapons and the agenda of women, peace and security, to which we referred to very often in the course of these discussions, there was also support for the equal, full and effective participation of women in all decision-making and implementation processes. It is very encouraging to see that state parties have taken innovative approaches to strengthening gender mainstreaming by engaging with informal gender working groups or appointing gender focal points in distinct convention. Renata, you mentioned that, and it is important that we follow up on this. But with all of these wonderful developments and important developments, it remains a point that much more needs to be done to really overcome what I would describe as a long-standing gender imbalance and to transform what remain as too often stereotypes and associations between technical expertise and masculinity. It is in this vein that UNIDIR has been collecting good practices that are being implemented to promote gender equality in a range of disarmament processes, but also including in conventional arms control. And I could give you many different examples, but we've already been mentioning some. And I think that above all, what we are really seeing as part of this work is that more and more practitioners are realizing that arms control efforts will be strengthened and be more effective with the inclusion of more women and also with people of different backgrounds and career tracks. The message is relatively clear. A more diverse arms control field is a stronger field, and we just need to make sure that this message is really heard loud and clear. Creating a level playing field is not only the right thing to do, but also a smart one, as more diversity in arms control can hopefully strengthen its effectiveness. And as was mentioned, also again, it could create more employment opportunities for women in these areas, which in turn will positively impact their own lives and the quality of life in their community. So we at UNIDIR remain extremely committed to continue to develop this work and to continue to also explore avenues that can improve women's participation and that can help increase diversity across all areas of arms control and disarmament, including mine action and weapons and ammunition management. We're very happy that you join us today. We're a small group, but clearly one very committed today. And so we invite you to please continue following our work and also, importantly, to reach out if you'd like to propose any further research partnerships, or any ideas for collaboration as we pursue this agenda. And so before concluding, just on time, I'd like to really give thanks first and again to Ambassador, really thank you so much, Ambassador, for joining us, the remarks, and also for being such a strong advocate and supporter on all of these issues. So thank you very much. And through you also, thank you to the Permanent Mission of the Philippines. Thank you also to our donors. I think it's, none of our work will be feasible without the support that we get from our donors, and that includes those providing specific support for our gender and disarmament work, but also the donors that provide core unearmarked funding to UNIDIR, which is so crucial, and that includes the Philippines, alongside Finland, France, Hungary, Iraq, Ireland, Kazakhstan, Luxembourg, Madagascar, Mexico, Pakistan, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, and Turkey. So we want to give a particular thanks to them, as well as also Canada, Ireland, Sweden, and Switzerland for specifically supporting our gender and disarmament work. I'd like to also give a vote of thanks for the wonderful UNIDIR gender team, those that have been speaking here today, Renata and Hannah, also Manaved in the background, and obviously as well, very much thanks to Erika for also providing all of the support. Thank you for all of the efforts. And last but not least, many thanks to each of you for joining us today. And with this, I close this event and wish you well. Thank you.